Hi there. I just want to discuss the top 10 chess traps in the Caro Kann defense. Okay, so we'll start from number 10 and count down, so let's get started. Okay, so white plays e4, black plays c6, d4, d5, knight c3, take on e4, knight takes e4, knight to d7, and this is where white plays queen to e2, and I'll give her queen to e2, and black plays this blunder, which is knight f6, and I'll give you 5 seconds to see if you can spot what white plays. Okay, white actually plays the stunning move knight d6, checkmate, and basically the pawn on e7 is pinned on the e line, and it might, with it being number 10, obviously it might be unlikely to get it, but as we come closer we'll get more traps that will actually be more easier to get, shall we say. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. We're going to number 9 now. Okay, and white starts as usual. e4, e4, c6, d4, d5, knight c3. Sorry, we play the advanced variation in this line, e5. Black plays bishop f5. White plays knight to f3. Black plays e6. White plays bishop e2, just standard book moves at the moment. Then black plays the standard c5, hitting the pawn chain. And white plays the most aggressive move, bishop e3, protecting the center, developing the bishop. Black plays knight d7. e7 and white castles. Okay, black plays knight e7, and now white plays c4, hitting the center on d5. Black decides to take on c4. Now white plays a very good move, which is knight to a3, hitting the pawn on c4, and then I can jump to c4 and b5, as you'll notice. But black decides to, since he can't defend it with b5, he decides to sacrifice it to try and stop the knight, come to that square and take on b2. But then white plays knight b5, obviously attacking the pawn on c3, but also threatens something very nasty as well. And if black plays c takes b2, white can simply hop in with knight d6 mate again, a similar mate to the first one, and it just shows you that there's a lot of tricks on the d6 square in the Caro Kann defense. So yeah, you can also mate from b5 and c4 in these sort of positions. Okay, we'll go to the next one, which is number 8. Okay, so it's e4 and c6, d4, d5, knight c3, d takes e4, knight takes e4, knight f6, And this is where white plays a slightly unusual move, queen to d3. And black now plays this move e5, hitting the center straight away. Quite an aggressive move. And white decides to take on e5. I think the idea is for the black queen to come out to a5 with check. Obviously hitting the pawn on e5 at the same time while giving check. He has an idea in mind to pin the knight on the e-file, so white plays bishop d2 attacking the queen. Black plays queen takes e5, and now the knight is pinned. So his idea was to basically get more pressure on the e-file. And I'll just see if you can guess what white's move is. I'll give you a few seconds. He actually just ignores the threat and just castles in this position, just leaving the knight on pre. And so obviously if you look at if black actually takes the knight on e4 like this, if he takes the knight on e4, white can simply play rook e1 and the queen is pinned, so he's going to lose the queen. Okay, so we just take that back. Okay, so I'll ask you the question, what will happen if black actually takes the knight with his knight? So what would happen if black takes with knight takes e4? Now what can white do? I'll give you a few seconds to try and figure it out. Well, actually, white has a very stunning move now, and this is why I included this particular one as well. Not because it's likely to get it, but because of its intrinsic beauty. I think it's worth mentioning in the kind of Hall of Fame. So white actually played a very stunning move, queen to d8 check. And basically, there's whatever black does, there's no defense to checkmate, so he's forced to take. King takes d8, and now white has this double check with the bishop and with the rook at the same time. The rook on the d file and the bishop on the g5 square. And obviously, if the king goes to this square, then the rook can simply come up and give checkmate. And also, if we just go back one square, if the king comes to c7, he's got this, probably one of the most beautiful mates ever, which is just bishop to d8 checkmate. The king can't escape onto b6 because it's covered by the bishop, and the king can't move onto the d line. So it's basically game over. Okay, so we'll now move on to number 7. Okay, so let's start as usual with e4, c6, d4, d5, and now white plays something a little bit different. He plays the fantasy variation, which is the move f3 in this position. So black decides to not get a cramped position, decides to exchange in the center. Okay, so white has 2 pawns abreast in the center. And now black decides to hit the center with e5. It wouldn't usually be good for white to take on e5, otherwise black will just trade queens and then he should be able to get his e-pawn back. Okay, so white decides to hold the tension and play knight f3, develop a knight. And just put some pressure on this e5 pawn, so black decides to take with d takes e4. white plays bishop to c4, developing his bishop and hitting, sort of pointing towards the f7 square, putting some pressure there. Okay, but black now plays this kind of tricky move. He plays bishop b4 check, hoping that he can maybe get some pieces off. So now this is where white springs the trap. He plays c3, attacking the bishop. Okay, so he's expecting that, you know, he can probably just trade pieces with d takes. So black decides to take on c3. Now this is where white plays a very nasty move, so I'll give you a few seconds to find it. Okay, well done if you spotted it. White actually played the move bishop takes f7 check. If he takes the bishop, off goes the queen. And also, well, let's have a look at it. So bishop takes f7, sorry, king takes f7, and queen takes d8. Oops, sorry. Queen takes d8. But also black has this counter threat, which is c takes b2 check. This is where white should play king e2, just stepping out, sidestepping the check. But then black has this option to get his queen back and take on a1 and win the rook. But this doesn't actually work anyway, because of white is simply knight g5 check. I think you can go king to, best move is king g6, queen e8 check, and the net is starting to close in. If he goes to king f6, he'll get mated on f7. So really he's only got one square, which is king h6. And then white simply plays knight e6 check, with a discovered check on the king from the bishop on c1, hitting the king on h6. So if he goes g5, he's got simply bishop g5, which is checkmate. End of game. Okay, let's just go back a few moves. Yeah, so that was basically the position where he took that square. Okay, so that's number 7 in that position. Okay, let's have a look at number 6 now. Just reset the board. Okay, so number 6, we've got e4, surprisingly c6, d4, d5, knight c3, and then d takes e4, knight takes e4, and this move pioneered by Karpov quite a lot as well, knight d7, knight d7, and white plays bishop to c4, black plays knight g to f6, white plays this move knight g5, threatening checkmate on f7 with the bishop. So black decides to parry that threat with e6. Now white plays a little tricky move now, queen e2. Queen e2. Okay, and so black plays knight b6, attacking bishop, also stopping the threat of knight takes f7, by the way, which was a threat. There's a lot of tricks in this position. So knight b6, the bishop comes back to b3, and then suddenly we find that actually the pawn is on on d4, so black decides to take it. Queen takes d4. Okay, white gets a nice development move with a tempo with knight f3, and this is what black was counting on. He played the move bishop b4, thinking he wasn't going to lose time basically and get one of his pieces out with tempo. Doesn't quite work, because if you look at it, white plays c3, black is going to play bishop takes c3 check and then grab the rook. Okay, so I'll give you 5 seconds to have a look at this position and see if you can decide on the best move for white. Okay, well, white actually did play c3 and just let black play bishop takes b4 with check. And instead of actually taking the bishop, which would be bad because black would win the rook, the king actually just moved sidestepped out of the check and played king f1. And now you've basically got a double attack on the bishop and the queen at the same time. So if the queen moves anywhere, basically you'll just take the bishop, and he can't really squirm out of it in any shape or form. So that's what happened in that game. Okay, let's have a look at, now we're on to number 5. Okay, so number 5, I think they're going to start to get better as well, these as we go along. So e4, c6, d4, d5, knight c3, take on e4, knight takes e4, and this move again, knight d7. We seem to get there's a lot of traps in this line. Knight d7. Okay, so white plays knight g5, and this was actually a line that beat Kasparov. It was I think it was Deep Blue versus Kasparov, and Kasparov got his move orders mixed up, and he lost very, very quickly to Deep Blue a number of years ago, and it was actually through this line as white. So I think Kasparov just had a bad day and got his move orders mixed up and ended up losing very, very quickly. Okay, so knight g5, black plays knight gf6, and white plays bishop c4, black plays e6, and white plays this tricky move again, queen e2, and white decides to play h6. And just show you the tricks in this position, see if you can find white's best move. Okay, so I think we discussed this in the last position, knight takes f7. It shows you how tricky this position is. So if the king takes, we've simply got queen takes e6 check, forced to go here. And I think we've actually, the quickest way is, you can probably win it a number of ways, but bishop d3 check, and then the king would go to h5, and then we've simply got this nice little move, queen h3, checkmate. Okay, so that was number 5. You'll notice there are some similarities in these games as well. Okay, so we're down to number 4. So e4, c6, d4, d5, and it's going to be the advanced variation as well, e5, and this is where black decides to hit the pawn chain straight away with c5. He doesn't really want to cramp position, so he tries to break up the center as quick as possible. So white tries to defend his center and hold the center with knight f3, and then black decides to put more pressure on the center with bishop g4, also pinning the knight. Now this is where white just decides to actually just take the pawn on c5. So d takes c5, and then black decides to hit that pawn on c5 with his bishop, developing the bishop and hitting the pawn on c5 at the same time. Now this is where white decides to spring the trap, as it were, and he plays c3. It looks like he's actually going to play his other pawn to b4 and then just strengthen that pawn on c5. And unfortunately, if black takes the pawn, bishop takes c5. See if you can spot what white can play now. Yes, well done if you spotted it. It's actually queen a4 check, and off goes the light squared bishop on g4. So it doesn't really matter what he plays, really. Probably knight c6 or something. Off goes the bishop, and it's really game over. Okay, so that was number 4. Okay, let's have a look at number 3 now. Okay, so again it's e4, c6, d4, d5, knight c3, and then exchange in the center as usual. Knight takes e4, c4, and then knight d7 again. Knight d7, and he goes for this tricky move again, knight g5, and black decides to try and kick the knight away straight away by going h6, which is actually a blunder. So see if you can spot white's move. 5 seconds. Yep. Okay, white decided to play the nice little move, knight e6. Okay, the point is if the pawn takes the knight, then it's simply checkmate. Well, he has one little move, putting the pawn in one square, but then we just take on g6 and it is finally mate. So okay, so if we just go back a couple of moves, there's also another option here. When after you play knight a6, the queen goes queen a5 check, and then we go bishop d2, and if black decides to go to b6, we can just play a move like bishop d3 or something like that. The idea is really, you can leave the knight hanging there for a while if you want. If he just goes takes, we can just take on we can just play queen h5, check, king d8. And then the idea is basically just to plonk the bishop on a5. And that just wins the queen. So there's a couple of variations on that as well. That's the general idea. Okay, that's number 3. Okay, let's have a look at number 2. Okay, so e4, c6, okay, knight c3. Okay, a slightly different line now. This was this is actually mentioned in Bobby Fischer's 60 Memorable Games. I think it's game 16 in Bobby Fischer's 60 Memorable Games. So black goes d5, and then white just develops with knight f3. Black takes on e4, white takes on e4, and this black plays now, which is basically a lemon. He plays a bad move, which is bishop f5, hitting the knight. And he can't quite get the same positions as he does in the main lines of the Caro Kann defense. So white plays knight g3, black plays bishop g6, and then this is where he tries to white harasses the bishop with h4. Black plays the flexible h6, and now the knight attacks the bishop on g6. So he decides to put it on h7. And just see if you can spot white's next move. Yes, it was actually just queen to h5 threatening checkmate on f7 with the queen and knight. So he has to try and parry this threat. Obviously he can't put his knight onto f6 or something like that because he'll just get mated. So what he has to do is play g6 to block that threat. Now can you spot what white played now? Pause the video if you like. White actually didn't retreat his queen. He actually played the very aggressive move bishop c4. And if the queen is taken on h5, he would simply go bishop takes f7 checkmate, which is a very nice checkmate. Also, if he doesn't do that, this is why I think this is the number 2 in terms of traps, because I think white also gets just a great game as well, even if he doesn't, even if the opponent doesn't fall for it. So instead of taking the queen, if he plays the move e6 to parry the threat on f7, white can simply retreat and play queen e2. And now let's say, I mean, black's got a couple of moves here. He can play moves like bishop to d6 or knight to d7, which actually both lose. So say, for example, you play the move bishop to d6. Okay, what would you play now? Well, actually, white has simply a nice threat, which is knight takes f7. And obviously this threatens the queen and the rook at the same time. It just black's position collapses. If he actually takes on f7, so king takes f7, queen e6 check. I mean, he can either go to f8 or g7, doesn't really matter. If he went there, it's simply checkmate. f7, it's just game over. And it just shows you how strong this attack is. It's incredibly strong. The only move he actually had in this position was actually he needed to defend sideways on the f7 square. A move like, say, queen to c7, protecting the f7 square. That would be the only sensible move in this position. Okay, so that was number 2. That's almost the number 1 spot, and yeah, I think that's one of my favorites. personal favourites, and I have actually won a proper match game with that variation, and actually checkmated the opponent. It was quite a strong player, funny enough, but he obviously missed this attack. Okay, so let's move on to number 1. Okay, so e4, c6, d4, d5, and this is the advanced variation again, so e5, and this line where black hits the center again, c5, that is quite popular, this line. So knight f3, bishop g4, just pinning the knight again, and then white plays d takes c5, which is, I think, is usually correct. D takes c5. Black plays knight c6, hitting this pawn at e5 because the knight is pinned. So white decides to defend his c pawn in this case and play bishop e3, and also spring in a trap. Okay, can you guess the next move for white? Black actually plays knight takes e5 first. So can you guess white's next move? Okay, congratulations if you found it. The next move is actually simply knight takes e5, spring in the trap, and obviously he suddenly finds himself that if he does take white's queen, white can simply go bishop e5 check, and black loses his queen, so he has to go over here, and then we just take on 7, king d8, and then we can probably just take the bishop. Might as well get the bishop off, get more pieces off. We can probably attack, try and get one of these pieces, but then we just get the rook as well, so will be a piece and an exchange up. Yeah, that's if he doesn't win the knight, of course, but will be at least will be even more up if he doesn't get the knight. But yeah, so that's just an easy win. So if you just go back a couple of moves, I think that's the reason this is one of my favourites actually, and I put it at the number 1 spot, is because of the amount of games I've won with this. And the idea I like about it is that when you actually play bishop e3, it kind of masks the trap, because it looks like you're just strengthening the c5 pawn in this position, and you would kind of think the light squares are defended because the bishop can drop back, or the knight can drop back for d7, but it's not actually possible. So it's the trap is well masked, and that's what I like about this one. So knight takes e5, and yeah, it's game over. I mean, he could retreat the bishop, but he's just lost a piece, so it's just game over. Okay, so thanks for watching. If you like the video, it is a little bit long, but obviously there's quite a lot of traps in this video. Please subscribe. I'm a new channel. I'm trying to create some new videos, and hopefully I'll get better once I get some editing software and things, so we can make it look a little bit more professional in the future. So if you like the video, please subscribe and click like. Okay, thanks for watching.